might well go and take it. I know what it is. You scared of shots. I am too, but guess what? It's gonna help you. Okay. All right.
Okay. I got it done.
You want me to go right now?
Well, let's see what these notes about first. I'm not gonna get you out of here soon because you got to get out of here.
I need to schedule our appointments at 1:30.
Like my sister, and she ain't let my niece get her to get grown. Been working, but then filed tax because she ain't making enough money. She ain't let the girl get her stimulus money. She said she didn't know she could get it. My sister did. And I don't know this time you get $300 a month for a child for a whole year.
6 months. That's it because we will not receive child credit next year when we file. So it'll start in July.
And they start putting the stimulus checks on your card this weekend. I ain't gonna get it this time because they gave it to me too fast last time. I ain't get it. Good.
You will not be first this time.
No, I ain't gonna be first this time. Shit, already. I ain't. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm a little early. I just wanted to be sure I knew how to get into this and could do it. Can I just stay here and, just turn off my audio?
I do not see anything wrong with it. That is perfectly fine.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Good morning, Tony. How are you doing this morning?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm exceptionally well because you spoke to me.
Morning, Tony.
Hi, Val.
I'm just here for moral support, you realize.
Well, you're going to have a few words to say, I think.
What is that? What do you want me to say? Do I need to open our paper up? I mean, I read it. I know what's in it, but what do you want me to say, Tony?
Well, I'm going to start out talking about the angst about Black and Latinx support for Trump.
Okay, cool.
And I think I could pause at that point and you could say a few words about that as well. And
About
then
the
I will
angst?
launch into the
Okay.
presentation. See if this looks right to you.
Okay.
Hold on a second, I'm sharing. Oops, that's not what I want. I want play in window. There
Right.
we go. Okay, can you see that?
I sure can. It looks good.
Okay. I just
Now,
need
when I talk about the angst, do you want me to offer at all just opinion on what I think, why they voted for him, or what do you want me to say specifically?
No, more about the way people reacted, as though Black support for Trump was just unprecedented and
Right,
shocking.
that it was a big deal. Yeah.
It was a
and
big
it really
deal,
was.
and of course
Okay.
we know that it wasn't a big deal, but
Right.
that says something about the political climate in particular. And this is something you could talk about. It's characteristic of the way even social scientists lump all Black folks into one box,
Right.
lump all Latinos into one
Right.
box.
Yep.
So if you're, remember, was it Biden who said, if you don't vote for me, you're not really Black? Remember
Yes. Yes.
that?
He
That
said
kind of
that.
that kind of attitude. So
Yeah.
I can start it out. I'll pause. You can chime in with some observations about why we started this project based on that angst,
Right.
and then I'll get back to the presentation.
Super. Thank you, sir.
Question, are you all gonna keep up with the time, or do you need me to remind you at 5 minutes until the time that we are nearing the end, because I have to be exactly for time?
Sure.
And I can
You
actually
can remind us, yeah.
I can actually send it through a probably chat message. So if you
I think Wendy Smooth is going to be chairing this session. So Wendy is the one you should contact when she comes on.
okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, I'm going to sign out right. Actually, I guess I can leave it running while I do a little bit of work on this presentation.
Right.
This doesn't look right.
What do you mean?
Well, this bullet point probably shouldn't be a bullet point. It
Okay.
should probably be,
Yeah. There you go. Looks good.
and I want to make it bold. Or maybe underlined.
Yes.
There we go. Does that work?
Yep. Looks good.
So here's what it's got, Val, since nobody else is here. Starting with Dawson, the importance of understanding ideologies, the large bloating voting blocks. Will groups work together or not? What are the main frames? First look at a new project. First, a puzzle from the real world, Trump's 12% and 32%. The numbers of people, the gender gap, and then turning back to attitudes, underlying vote choice. What's the best way to map ideologies, research premises, the diversity, the breadth, outliers, and extreme values as well. Using policy views as markers, socialization experiences.
Right.
I can actually, if you like, when we get to this slide, I can turn it over to you, because this is stuff we've talked about a lot, about the diversity within the Black and Latinx populations, but also the fact that the outliers are significant. And then policy views, and then formative experiences. Does that make sense?
Sure. If you want me to, I'm happy to do that.
So if you do those, if I'll start with what is the best way to map ideologies, and then I'll just move the slides and you can talk based on the slides. Does that make sense? And then here I'll come back in talking about the GSS, selecting variables, hi Wendy.
Okay.
and then next steps.
How
Would
are
you
you?
make one other change to the slide, Tony? Hi, Wendy.
Which slide?
The first one, your name should go first. Change it,
Okay.
please. It's in alphabetical order even if you do it that way, which is good. You have done the bulk of this. You should be the first officer. Thanks.
Okay.
We're ready, Wendy, I think.
Sure, I think we still have a few more minutes before we get started, but it's good to see you all. I'm gonna step away for just a second and I'll come right back.
Okay,
Okey-doke. Is the slideshow still on screen?
it is.
Yes.
Still
All right, I'm
sharing.
gonna unshare that. Okay, now we're back to normal.
Mhm, mhm. I tried to take my glasses off today, but my eyes are still so puffy from all this stuff that I've been doing recently. So I'm leaving mine on. I know it doesn't.
I
look-
can't. I'm nearsighted, so I see better close up without them.
Yeah. Good morning.
Sorry, advanced net crew checking everything out.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Now we
Yes.
can.
Yes.
Awesome. I apologize in advance. I thought I put my dog and my son, my youngest, down to take a nap, and they've both gotten up. So I will mute during the other presentations. I apologize. I don't live in Valdosta, so going into the office to do these things is not possible. So I apologize in advance.
Understand.
Okay,
I
Mandy.
have my dog with me too. She's in her bed asleep. Let's hope she stays that way for about an hour. But sometimes, particularly when she hears other people's voices, she's just curious. She jumps in my lap and wants to see what's going on. So
Oh, what kind of dog do you have?
a long-haired miniature dachshund.
Oh, we used to have dachshunds. Yeah, Whiskey can't fit in my lap. He's only 5 months old, but he weighs 65 pounds. And so,
Yeah, no, you can't have one in your lap. Mine's about
no,
10.
but you might see a big bloodhound melon like on your street at some point. So my sons insisted on a bloodhound. So so that's what they got for Christmas. And he's adorable, but he is huge and nosy. So I apologize in advance. Sorry, that was my son, not the dog. So
Oh, I need to turn off my emails so it doesn't interrupt. I'll be back.
Good morning, all. We are supposed to begin at 10 o'clock and end precisely at 11:15. It is 10 o'clock now, so I'm almost certain that we will be beginning in a few minutes.
Thank you.
Yes,
We're just waiting for our panel chair to return.
there she is.
My apologies, of course, once our panel started, my
There she is.
internet started to go crazy. So I'm on a hotspot, but we'll be good. I hope. How's everyone? All right. We could probably take a couple of more minutes to let people join us.
I don't know if anyone else is having trouble seeing you, Wendy.
Did I read the program
can hear you.
correctly that we have just the one paper, or do we have two?
We have two.
Oh, you can't see me?
Can't see you, and then the audio
But
is,
you're not seeing
there you are.
choppy.
The audio is kind of garbled as well.
Yeah, your audio is breaking up, Wendy.
Okay, let me try one more thing to go out and come back in. I apologize. for
Actually,
this.
your audio's a lot better right now on my end.
Yeah, that's true. It
Say a
got
few
better.
words, Wendy. I think it'll work.
Okay. I
Yeah.
won't tempt fate and keep switching back and forth.
Yeah, it's all right now.
Okay.
Lost you again, Wendy. Good morning, Joseph, Stephen.
Good morning, Tony.
Good morning,
Nice to-
everyone. Thank you,
Nice to
Dustin.
see you guys.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Dr. Brown. Got any snow in Chicago yet, Stephen?
We had so much snow this year, but it was 60 degrees yesterday, so it's all melted.
Are you
But
getting
we've
any
been-
more? Denver's getting whacked,
I
huh?
don't know. I mean, you've been to MPSA in April with snowstorms, so we don't count it out until we're into June.
Yeah, it was 71 here yesterday,
Was it really? Yeah,
which is insane.
I'll take it. It's okay. I'm ready.
In Florida, it's about 80 degrees outside. I'd love to be on the beach.
That sounds nice too.
Good morning, Emmett,
Good morning.
and congratulations again.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Everybody doing well?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Wendy Smooth is having some challenges with her audio and video, but she says we'll get started real soon.
Okay.
So your long apprenticeship begins, huh?
Yes, yes, yes.
Did everyone hear the news about Emmett?
No, I was gonna ask. I'm a little.
Tell us, Emmett.
I was elected the vice president of INCOPES for the next term. So
Good
I'm
for you.
excited about working with Tiffany and supporting some of her initiatives.
And then after that, you will be.
I would be the president, yeah, in 2 years. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's
Thank you.
awesome.
Tiffany's wonderful. I imagine she'd be great to work with.
Oh, absolutely. I love Tiffany to death.
Did you say work with or work for? Emmett will find out. All of NCOPE's presidents aren't going to fit in a single picture much longer.
True.
The banner photo at the top of the website is getting bigger and bigger. It's nice.
I don't know if anyone's busy at 5 o'clock this evening, but I have a roundtable with a couple of former presidents, and we're going to be talking about some former presidents. If anybody wants to jump in when we talk about Drs. Barker and Combs.
It's on my schedule.
Yes, baby.
I'm wondering if we should get started.
Bring him here, son.
Wendy's not here, is she?
Right, she's not, and it may be wise because it will end at 11:15.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you go ahead and start, Tony? If ours is the first paper, I don't know which one goes first. I'm not looking at the program.
Is that all right with you, Mandy, and your office?
Yeah, if Dustin and Griffin are fine with going second, that is perfectly fine with me to follow the order in the program.
All right.
Totally fine with me.
I am Professor Tony Afenia at Providence College. My co-author is Valerie Martinez-Ebers at the University of North Texas. And our paper explores the framework of a research project, which we've recently started to model and map the ideologies, comparative ideologies of the Black and Latinx electorates in the United States. It was inspired to a certain extent by the hand-wringing and angst that was generated by the visible presence of many Latinx men in particular at the insurrection at the Capitol in January. But also, you know, thinking back over the prior several years, by the visible presence of both Black and Latinx people as part of the Trump orbit, Trump campaign. But the hand-wringing that took place after January 6th was somewhat striking because a lot of pundits wrote as though they didn't realize that there were conservative African Americans or that there were conservative Latinx people. So I'm going to turn it over to Valerie for a few minutes to talk about that motivating sequence of events, and then I will share a presentation and we'll work through the paper.
There isn't too much more to add to that story, except for the fact that we did see that the vote tally for Donald Trump among African Americans and Latinx did creep up between 2016 and 2020. I would point out to you, though, it wasn't a significant amount historically. There have always been Latinx who supported Republicans. And of course, one of the things that the coverage in the newspapers fails to mention is there's great diversity within not only the Latinx community, but there is some among African Americans as well. And so we wanted to be, we really wanted to get into that. You know, obviously, the political pundits don't know as much as hopefully we do, but we want to be sure that we have systematic evidence over time.
So I'm going to start sharing, if that's okay. Hi, Wendy, I see you're back. We were advised to go ahead and start, given the time constraints.
Thank you.
I'm going to share, if I can, our presentation. Everybody see that okay? The paper is mapping the ideological contours of Black and Latinx opinion. And it begins with a recognition that we have some forebears who have done much of this work before us. In particular, we begin with Michael Dawson's Black Visions from 2001, which offered a comprehensive ideological profile of Black America. Dawson identified strands of political thought, and he linked them to the Black historical experience. However, among scholars and studies of Latinx politics, there is no such analysis, deep and broad analysis of contemporary ideologies for Latinx populations. So part of our motivation is to imagine what would it look like if one were to write a book comparable to Black Visions, which identified and compared and measured and put into historical context the different ideological strands that make up the Latinx population as well. Now, the reason this is important is because, as you know, the Black and Latinx electorates now comprise the largest of the minority voting blocs. And if census data census forecasts are accurate, by the mid-2040s, the non-white population in the United States will be a majority of the overall population, if not the electorate. So that mapping the terrain of Black and Latinx ideologies can help scholars and activists identify areas of emphasis, areas of self-interest, and areas of shared interest. In fact, we feel that the future prospects for truly emancipatory politics may depend on whether these two powerful groups maintain and strengthen their intra-group and their intergroup cohesion, or alternatively, will they instead pursue group-specific goals which may undermine their potential alliance and help to perpetuate white power, even as the white population continues to shrink. So the question we ask is, what are the main ideological frames which shape Black and Latinx opinions and behavior? This is the first look at a new research project. In this paper, we hope to sketch the outlines of an analysis which was inspired by Dawson. The analysis, which we're just beginning, you won't find a lot of conclusions or statistical analyses in this paper. Those will come at a later date. But we are beginning to look at multiple survey sources in order to identify key ideological frames for both the Black and the Latinx electorates. When Dawson wrote Black Visions, the survey data on which it was based was the National Black Politics Study, 1993 to 1995. At the time, that was the only large random sample survey project focused on Black America. Since then, there have been many additional survey projects and large oversamples in the NES and the GSS, and there have been several Latino specific surveys as well. So since 2001, we as scholars have acquired a great deal more potential data that we can use for this kind of analysis. So we're still in the process of looking at a variety of survey instruments. The General Social Survey is our first, it's the largest, but also the collaborative multiracial post-election surveys from 2008 to 2020, the Latino National Surveys of 2005 to 2008, and so on. But first, a puzzle from the real world, as we discussed. In the elections last year, Trump won an estimated 12% of Black voters, which was an increase from 8% in 2016. Among Latinx voters, his support also increased from 28% in 2016 to 32% in 2020. Now, these are all exit poll data, and you're surely aware of some of the problems with exit polls, but we're comparing apples to apples in the sense that we're looking at exit poll data for all of these analyses. Now, the next step here is to look at the numbers. Those percentages equate to about 2.4 million Black people who voted for a man who had endorsed white supremacy on multiple occasions, and an even larger number of Latinx people, perhaps as many as 4.5 million, voted for a candidate of xenophobia and anti-Latino racism. So on the surface, there's a puzzle. In addition, we know that there's a gender gap in both the Black and the Latinx electorates. About 9% of Black women voted for Trump, but the number doubled among Black men to more than 19%. Among Latinx voters, the gender gap was not as severe, but it was still significant, with about 30% of Hispanic women voting for Trump and 36% of Latino men. So in our project, we're looking at not at vote choice per se, but taking the 2020 election as an example of how this may play out in the real world. We want to look at the attitudes and the identities behind vote choice, but in a comprehensive way and over a number of years. So to understand Trump's rising support among Black and Latinx voters, despite having governed as a racist and campaigned as a racist, we believe a deeper analysis of attitudes and identities beyond vote choice, beyond partisanship, can be helpful. So the question we ask is, what is the best way to map Black and Latinx ideologies beyond partisanship and vote choice?
Yes, and so our first thought was to get away from the usual kind of looking at, where is the majority of the opinion lie. We wanted to look at the full diversity of Blacks and Latinx when it comes to their policy preferences and how then that might reflect their ideology. And so, the first recognition is that there's lots of differences that typically get ignored, particularly when you look at studies that look at policy preferences. They lump things together. So we want to break it up. We also want to be sure to not only identify commonalities between the two groups, but differences. And more importantly, also the outlier opinion among both of those groups. So that, like, if we mapped the shape of opinion, right, for African Americans, for Latinx on the same policy issue, we'd want to see where we're as interested in how many people agree as how many people disagree. And so I think that we'll use those policy views then to determine our ideological markers. And of course, we've got a great rubric to use sort of with Michael Dawson's work, but we've got to make the same thing for the Latinx population as well. And we've chosen some particular policy issues that we think resonate with both groups, perhaps differently.
Yeah, around immigration policy, for instance, we might find that there's a divergence. Latinx publics, although they're not unified on immigration policy, there is a diversity even within the Latinx communities. We might find that there's broader support for immigration reform among Latinx voters than among African American voters. Conversely, on questions such as police brutality, police violence, discrimination in the workplace, we might find congruence. That we might find that Black and Latinx people look much more like each other than either group looks like non-Hispanic whites.
I thought this was you. Sorry, go ahead, Tony. I don't think.
We also consider some recent research on the role of worldviews and formative socialization experiences. And so we're going to take a look at those as well. These include views on life and death, destiny, personal responsibility, childhood relationships to parents, the role of parenting, and so on. All of these may also shape attitudes towards authority, attitudes towards risk and reward, and so on.
Let me interject just one thing here. One of the works that really kind of influenced us in this area is by Hetherington and Wheeler. It's that book with Prius and Pickups, which they acknowledge is based primarily on white Americans. And so the worldviews of African Americans and Latinx may be formulated much differently, but that's sort of the literature that we first started with. And obviously we want to see how it relates.
Right. We want to look beyond obvious markers of partisanship and ideology. If one asked voters where they locate themselves on a liberal to conservative scale, you'll get a distribution, but our researcher doesn't really know what that means. The word conservative, the word liberal mean different things to different people. We think it might be more precise to ask people how they feel about specific public policies and then array the populations on a distribution using those. Now, our primary evidence base in this first cut is from the General Social Survey, which has been administered essentially every 2 years since 1972, includes more than 64,000 respondents, more than 6,100 variables spread over that period. One of the problems with the GSS is that the variables come and go. The question items are not the same through the entire period. So we're working now to identify which question items can be used for time series analysis or for a long-term analysis, and which can only be used for snapshots. In addition, it wasn't until the 2000 GSS that the Latinx population was broken out as a separate respondent group. So we have no good data for Latinx respondents prior to 2000. The category other was used for everyone else. But in addition to that, the GSS's respondent pool is overwhelmingly white. The questions that were included were disproportionately selected by white researchers concerned about the attitudes of the majority population and so on. So one of the things we're doing is looking for those areas where there's a clear absence of information on life experiences which are more directly relevant to the communities of color. For instance, there's the questions about landlords and questions about housing affordability only appear in one survey through the entire period. If we had consistent information about housing discrimination and about relations to landlords over the whole period, we might be able to tease out more detailed differences between the groups. So the first step is to select variables. We start by using the news and public opinion discourse around Trump's support. What were the values and motivations that have been ascribed to Trump's Black and Latinx voters? We use news reports, some empirical studies to catalog the most common characteristics of those voters. The first of those, the one which is mentioned most commonly, is economic angst, that there may in fact be significant levels of anger about economic marginalization that influences the attitudes and behavior of Latinx as well as African-American voters. Trump's appeal to Black economic aspirations and Latinx aspirations, often channeled through celebrity surrogates, may have influenced Black voters, especially those who have been influenced over the years by Trump's self-description as a successful and wealthy business person. For Latinx voters, there's also the counter-revolutionary influence of the micro-targeting that was done, in particular in South Florida, in Spanish language social media, spreading disinformation about the two parties and the two candidates' relationships and attitudes towards the Castro regime, towards Venezuela and Chavez, towards Nicaragua, and also towards the end, some controversy over a Goja Foods boycott, over the Goja Foods CEO's support for Trump as well. I don't know what happened there. Sorry. Let's see if we can. Okay. There is also the element of Christian nationalism, which appeared in some of the micro-targeting and direct targeting of both Black and Latinx electorates. Some share of those voters may have been influenced by concerns about Biden's stance on reproductive rights, on abortion, and particularly susceptible to micro-targeting. Some of the mega churches in both the Black and the Latinx communities have adopted very strong, not just prosperity gospel approaches, which is common, but also Christian nationalism, and have been vulnerable to appeals to a white nationalism, even in Black and Latinx churches. Finally, toxic masculinity, which is often noted as a common thread among the different strands of the Trump base. Some number of Black and Latinx people, especially men and boys, do share an affinity for macho swagger, braggadocio, and wounded pride violence, and they may seek validation in political leaders. Trump is the epitome of hyper-masculine, gold accessorized, locker room talk, trophy wife, aggressively masculine persona, and that may in fact have drawn some support. At an NCOPE session a few days ago, Nicole Alexander Floyd and Stephanie Williams addressed this, and both of them, in response to questions about the minority support for Trump, pointed to the overwhelmingly male character of that support, at least visibly, and the fact that groups like the Proud Boys, who are multiracial, in fact, the leader of the Proud Boys in Florida is Latino, are open to membership from non-white members, but they're extravagantly masculinist and toxic to a certain extent. So what are the next steps for us? The next steps for us will be to identify survey items in the GSS that allow us to estimate Black and Latinx policy preferences and worldviews, looking at those variables that emerge from the Trump campaign, economic anxiety and inequality, foreign affairs, nationalism, masculinity. Then to measure the intensity of sentiment on those various items, especially those that have the most immediate relevance, immediate political relevance, and discuss how these pose opportunities either for alliance building and intra-group solidarity or conflict. Finally, we are also looking at patterns over time by evaluating age cohorts. The GSS in particular has the birth year for each respondent. So we can do a kind of a naturalistic, organic lumping by what was going on in the world. Not simply by the age of the respondent, but looking at the years of formative socialization for each individual. A child growing up in Memphis in the 1950s and 1960s is very different from a 10 or 12-year-old child growing up in a different part of the country or at a different time. So we're not simply looking at age, but we're looking at cohort in relation to historic circumstance. And that's it. Stay tuned, folks. It's a big project. It's actually bigger than we thought it was going to be, but we're looking forward to learning more about these potential areas of alliance and the potential areas of friction between what are increasingly the two most significant non-white electorates in the country. Thank you. And thank you, Val, for your contributions.
Thank you. Thank you both. What an incredible undertaking. I have to say, I am so excited about this project. Before we get into discussion for this particular paper, I do want to just assure that there is not another paper to be presented.
There is another paper.
So there is, I apologize. I'm not able to see the full, I got all kinds of challenges this morning. I apologize. So will our other paper presenters, before I go into comments, will our other paper presenters begin?
Sure. I'll take the lead if Dustin and Griffin are still good with that, and then if they have anything they would like to add, they're welcome to do so. I will attempt to share my screen. Like Wendy, I am prone to technological difficulties, but to sort of give everyone an idea of what's going on here is in the fall, we sort of kicked off our inaugural student research team. And so we have Dustin and Griffin are undergraduate students, and Amaya is one of my former undergraduate students, but she's in the MPA program now. And so she was very helpful in formulating the survey. I put it out on Qualtrics, but the students told me what questions they wanted to include. I helped them out with the question wording, but so that's kind of what's going on here. And I do think that our project ties in very well with what Val and Tony were talking about. And so hopefully we can all sort of learn from each other. And Griffin and Dustin, if you guys want to add anything as I'm going through this, please let me know. And can y'all see that? And I'm sorry, my son decided to scream right as I got started. Can you all see this okay?
Yes, yes.
Excellent. Okay. Lord willing, my child and my dog are not ready to kill each other. And so we'll get started. What we're doing here is we're trying to explain, much like what Val and Tony were talking about, we're trying to explain minority support for Trump. And we're specifically looking at the Latinx community and African Americans. Trump obviously has a history of incendiary remarks, racist, nativist remarks. The list is clearly not comprehensive. We're looking at everything from talking about crime, referring to African American or African rather countries as shitholes, referring to white supremacists as very fine people. This is clearly a truncated list, and the idea is sort of in the same vein as a number of the things that we have been talking about. How can we explain what we are, albeit modest, but there was an increase between 2016 and 2020 in both of these groups, as Tony pointed out. And so, and again, modest increase, but still an increase in Trump support in both the African American and Latinx community between 2016 and 2020. We're looking to three explanations and somewhat interrelated explanations. We begin by considering religion and region. Trump obviously pulls a lot of support from the South, from the lower Midwest, and areas that are known as the Bible Belt. And as the image in front of you, if you can see that, illustrates Protestant heavy areas are areas that tended to support Donald Trump. We're also looking to terror management theory, which I attribute the students to introducing me to this because it's something that I wasn't familiar with. Beginning with Becker in 1971 and moving forward, it sort of basically says that human behavior is the result of the understanding of two key principles, and that is death is inevitable and you don't want it to be. And so reminding people of the inevitability of death then causes them to become fearful. It increases anxiety and causes them to engage in certain behaviors in order to defend against threats. Now, increasing self-esteem can result in the reduction of this mortality salience. And this is when we get into our third notion, which is that education matters, because education can then education then can increase self-esteem. So how does terror management theory apply to Trump? Trump very clearly makes people feel like they are in immediate danger. I love the quote about suburban housewives. I think is very illustrative because one, it very clearly shows that Trump doesn't understand what the suburbs look like or who lives there. But it's the idea that, he is going to prevent others from encroaching upon the suburbs, right? Races, criminals, drugs are pouring across the border, and really bad people are flooding into the airports, and there's all of these issues, and I'm the only person that can fix it, right? Ignore those Black Lives Matter people. There's just a bunch of Antifa radicals in there, right? And I mean, the Trump's language very clearly is intended, or at least reminds individuals of the inevitability of death. And the idea is that they have to defend themselves against those threats. And if he's presenting himself as the alternative, the only one that can fix it, the idea is that they want to support Trump in order to save themselves. Gentlemen, is that a fair way to characterize that?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I would say so.
Okay, rock on. So moving on to the education link, there's a great article by Fording and Schramm in New Political Science from 2017 that does a great job of illustrating that Trump didn't have this overwhelming support among conservatives and Republicans across all segments of those populations that tends to be presented to people. He lost support among the Republican establishment. He lost support among public policy experts and conservative and intellectuals. What he did well doing was igniting and encouraging low information voters that are both motivated by fear and anxiety and are very manipulable. For this reason, we think that our sample of college students works really well because they're at a point in which their opinions, going back to the Sears work, are less crystallized, and they're sort of in a malleable point themselves. So ultimately, we reached 3 hypotheses. The evangelical hypotheses says that racial or ethnic group members, and in particularly African Americans and Latinx college students identifying as evangelical Christians are going to be more likely to vote for Trump. And in this case, we're looking at having already voted for Trump or offering a indication that they will vote for Trump, because we administered the survey in the fall of 2020, so mail-in voting was ongoing at the time. We offer the education hypothesis. It said those with parents or guardians with less formal education are more likely to vote for Trump. And finally, we get to specifically into the terror management theory hypothesis that says those that are more concerned with personal safety are going to be more likely to vote for Trump. So we have a national sample of college students. Admittedly, it's a convenient sample. We have a lot of VSU students. We have some students from Illinois. Tiffany was great in getting us some students from the California system. We have an N of 525, but there are some issues with our sample. It's overwhelmingly female. We do have a large, and this is a lot of this is attributable to VSU, which doesn't have a very large Latinx community, but does have a large African American community. Our samples 50 is just over half white, 35% African American, and just over 7% Latinx. We are unable to control for sexual orientation because while we had a large percentage, an impressively large percentage of students identify as not heterosexual, whether that's bisexual, homosexual, prefer, or other, only people that indicated that they were women identified as not heterosexual. All the men in the sample identified as heterosexual. So in terms of how we estimate each of these measures, our evangelical estimate, we pull a lot from Laura Olson at Clemson and Olson and Warber, who contrast different ways of measuring religiosity: believing, behaving, belonging, right? The idea is, are you looking at what group you affiliate with? Are you looking at how often you go? Or are you looking at what it is that you believe? To this end, we focus on a biblical literalism scale, with the presumption that those that fall higher on the biblical literalism scale are going to be more evangelical. Greater than 50% of our sample hits in the middle of the scale, and they perceives the Bible as the inspired word of God, not to be taken literally word for word. The low end of the scale is it's a book of fables. We pull from more widely used surveys. Our education estimate looks at the highest level of education completed by either parent. And so that goes from less than high school to PhD, MD, that kind of thing. And our terror management theory is based on a perception of safety with Trump as president. The question is specifically, to house your degree of agreement, that's odd to say, with the statement, I feel safe with Donald Trump as president. It's a 7-point ordinal scale. This is a truncated model that you're seeing in front of you. And I apologize if the way that I have this tiled, I can only partially see it. So hopefully you guys can see all of it. What we find is a great deal of support for terror management theory among white and non-white respondents. Those that feel more safe with Trump as president were more likely to vote for Trump. This was the case for non-white students as well as it was for white students. Perhaps one of the more interesting findings in our study is that biblical literalism applied only to non-whites, which I actually think ties relatively well into some of the stuff Tony and Val were addressing. Perhaps this is because one of the things that we speculate is that this might actually tie into terror management theory well too, right? The need to tie into, to cling to biblical literalism when you feel more threatened, because it would explain why we would see that among African Americans and the Latinx community versus the white community. We failed to find support for the education hypothesis. So sort of a summary of our findings are that the evangelical hypothesis is supported, but among non-whites. And for what it's worth, we have precious few think there was 6 respondents in the non-white sample that were neither African American or Latinx. The education hypothesis is not supported at all. The terror management theory hypothesis is supported across both African American, Latinx, and the white community. Again, there's some caveats that we all need to keep in mind when we're looking at this sample. First, it is overwhelmingly female. Second, we are unable to control for sexual orientation. And finally, perhaps part of the reason that we're not finding anything with regard to education is what makes college students so attractive as a study population for something like this may also be problematic in that once you begin the collegiate experience, you maybe just minimal exposure to college, to the college experience provides you with enough of a buffer, if that makes sense, as opposed to, you know, you completing a degree or X number of years in college, because we didn't find class standing mattered either. So for X number of years in college versus, you know, parents that are highly educated or not. So, and if if Dustin and Griffin don't have anything they would like to add, I can stop there so we can get some comments on both papers.
Just want to add one quick thing. I think this study was extremely interesting to conduct, and with more time and a larger sample size, I think the findings could be way more interesting, because we were pressed for time and getting a sample size of college students was great. But if this survey can be expanded even further and taken to that next level, then I think the findings will be extremely interesting to start to look at in more detail.
I think so too. I am fascinated because twice now we have, and not with the student team, but with actually a project I did with another student, twice now with collecting data, we have came up with some very large non-heterosexual populations, you know, in comparison to sort of the greater population. And I do think that also speaks to some of the impact of the collegiate experience. So I would like to push it forward to sort of see what happens. So that's it for me, unless Griffin would like to share anything.
No, I think you covered it.
Thank you so much, Mandy, for that presentation and for the amazing work of undergraduates. I'm always so heartened when I see undergraduates digging into this work early on. It means that we have a long time to see you doing this work with us, and hope to see future papers with Dustin and Griffin as well on the papers. What I want to start with, you're muted now.
I'm sorry. Yeah, they have been fabulous. The interest that we got among the students at Amaya too, in just wanting to put together a survey and actually thinking about question wording and going beyond, I just got to get through the scope and methods class, right? Like, I've been very impressed with the level of interest these students are taking. In fact, Dustin and Griffin have actually done 2 directed studies with me that are pretty research intensive. And so, yeah, I'm very proud of our undergraduate students. So.
Wonderful. It's nice to have your professor beaming and your grades are already turned in, right? So this is incredible. This is really good work. I want to say that about both papers, because what I wrote down when I was thinking about even the sheer titles of these papers, I kept saying, you know, I don't recognize my people, right? And so will these papers help me to have a better understanding of, or some appreciation for what we're hearing and what we're seeing as people are expanding the ways in which they are acting politically. And the more we dig into these research areas, the greater understanding we will have of a range of political attitudes. And we are more positioned as scholars to respond to the claims that the Latinx community or the African-American community are monolithic, right? And we have to have additional framing. We know that as academics because we are looking at the data, but how we communicate that back and mirror that back out to the broader public will help help us to have more robust conversations instead of these kinds of flattenings of our communities with the assumption that there's a certain level of predictability, which these papers both illustrate that is clearly not the case. But we do have a responsibility as scholars to explain the why. And I don't think that we have been as engaged in doing that as we can. I'm going to start with the Martinez and Affiné paper, the Mapping the Ideological Context. As I had already said, I was very excited to see this project. I think it is a long overdue undertaking in the sense of understanding Latinx public opinion in the same ways that we think about the seminal work of Michael Dawson with Link 8. I think that alone, hear me, Val and Tony, that alone is a masterful undertaking that we need. So I am a fan of rallying you to really focus on even that side of the equation. And I say that because we find the information in bits and pieces that, one, we have to understand the historical. Are you all able to hear me? Are you able to hear me?
Yes.
I'm going to turn off my video so that you can hear my audio. And I apologize. The cable folks are coming, but they're not coming. Okay. So are you, okay. So a thumbs up if you can hear me. Okay.
We lost you, Wendy. It sounds like those little
pieces that I think we are okay. Nope. Nothing. Let me see if I can actually, can you hear me at all? My cursor.
Now we can.
Okay, so yeah, Emmett is recommending everyone turn off their cameras. Maybe we could, I'm so sorry. Okay, how can you hear me now? If someone will put it in the chat that you can hear me.
I can hear you now.
Thank you, Emmett. Okay, so where I was, so in terms of the need for an analysis of Latinx voters that parallels Dawson's seminal work on Black public opinion. There's so much we have yet to capture and fully understand regarding Latinx public opinion. And one of the things that I was in particularly interested in, and I think that there's a need to do this independent of the comparison to African Americans, though I certainly say that that point of convergence is incredibly important and central to a way for us to move forward, because we certainly see among activists, and when we look into particular local communities and even local races not focused on federal elections, we see a lot more of this kind of convergence, this kind of allyship performed on the ground, and helping to understand how public opinion is formulating around activist interventions at the local level, I think is much more a rich space for us, if you will, to understand, because there's so much static in the federal data, I would argue. And I would really encourage both projects. The second paper is a little bit different because it's so focused on the 2020 elections. But with Val and Tony's paper in particular, I was a little struck that you moved into policy areas that centered around the Trump presidency, because that is such an area of volatility. And if this project's major goal is to actually
Sorry,
help us to
Wendy, you dropped off.
understand trends and help us to understand the development spaces of convergence and the spaces of African Americans. And I think a much more help. Okay. Okay, are you able to hear me?
Now we are, but you were gone for quite a while.
Oh,
It's
geez. Okay.
Wendy, it comes and goes. At times it sounds like those little toddler pianos with the chiming. It's
Oh,
a-
geez, that's the worst.
you know what I'm
Okay.
talking about?
Maybe we could share commentary via email if we sort of run up against a time limit, because I'm having the same issue. Like it's hard for me to link together the comments.
Oh, you all, I certainly apologize. Here's what I will do. I will send my comments to the papers, if you're able to hear me.
Yeah, I was able to hear that. You said you'll send the comments. You'll email the comments?
Yes, but I
Okay.
encourage you all to continue to talk amongst yourselves, since my internet is the problem, but your internet is fine.
Thank you, Wendy. I appreciate the time you put into this, and I'm sure I speak for Val that we look forward to getting your comments. And I'm glad you also recognize that this was the first cut at this, and it's a good time for you to get involved, because
Yeah, we
the best time to
appreciate
change
your
direction
input.
is at the beginning. So
Yeah.
thank you.
If just for what it's worth, I'm fascinated in the project, and I love that you are not just focusing on ideology, but rather you are trying to get actually at policy ideas. I did, and I don't know if it would be helpful for you. I apologize that I may have the date down, but I have a social science journal piece from, I think, 2016. And I can send it along if you think it would be helpful. We're also looking at college students' ideologies, and what we found, and now we didn't constrain it, but we did control for race and ethnicity. One of the things that we found was those individuals that identified as conservative were able to understand conservative fiscal policies, but those respondents that identified as liberal actually didn't seem to understand their policy positioning at all. In our in the study that we did, at least based on asking policy related questions, right? So the interestingly, now, and again, this is another project that was based on trying to better understand student attitudes. But one of the things that we found was those students that identified as conservative were actually very egalitarian in their policy preferences, social policy preferences. But we didn't see that among the students that were identifying as liberal. So that was a kind of a fascinating finding for us. I don't know that if it would, I don't know, Tony and Val, I don't know if that would be
Yeah, if
helpful.
you could send us the citation for that, that would be interesting.
sure.
You might recall back in the 90s, when the Clinton administration was pushing welfare reform, there were a number of surveys that asked respondents, how they felt about welfare, and people are like, oh no, welfare is terrible, you know. And they say, well, how do you feel about food stamps? Oh, food stamps are cool. You know, so this unlinking of ideology, you know, people begin to welfare. If you're against welfare, that means you're conservative. But when you ask details on the policy, you find out that there's actually a very different distribution. That's one of the reasons we want to use policy as a surrogate for ideology. We may compare it to self-reported, you know, liberalism or conservatism, but we don't think that gives us as much information as asking people about specific extant public policies about which they might have much more reasonable positions.
I would concur on that.
Following Wendy's suggestion, I'd love to hear from Stephen or Clarissa or Emmett or Joseph, any of the other folks in this session. If we were all in a big room together, I'd be staring at you. Joe, what do you think?
I'm happy to defer to my colleagues. I do have a couple of thoughts. I don't know that they're going to be super helpful, but they'll be encouraging. Does anybody else want to jump in first? No, I'm on. My mic's on, so I got to go. First of all, Tony and Val, I'm excited about the project, but I'm really excited about the political socialization part of the project. I think that we as a discipline have abandoned that, and this is not an accusation. I stopped looking at socialization after my first book over 20 years ago. So it's neither an advertisement for my own work or an accusation to anybody else. But I think there's so much still we have to learn about the transmission of political values from generation to generation and the way agents of socialization matter in terms of our attitude formation. So I'm really excited about that. So, and I know the limitations of the GSS as well as the some of the exciting things that come along with it. So that's wonderful. And then for Mandy and Dustin and Griffin, the terror management theory is a really I didn't know anything about it either until just now. I'm so glad I came to this panel. I learned so much. But my goodness, what a fascinating tool. And I don't know how robust it's been tested empirically, but it really has, from a political psychology perspective, has a lot of appeal in terms of the way people might be motivated to process information at a non-conscious level. And so I have all kinds of crazy ideas about hooking people up to neuroscience apparatuses and trying to figure out how much they're fearing death when they're thinking through.
I have to give the students total credit for that, because I was not familiar with it either. They brought it to me. And now I'm actually including it in my political psych class after they brought it to me.
Yeah, it's a really very interesting. So thank you for that. So as I said, I don't have anything very super helpful. I'm sorry about that, but I wanted to offer those two thoughts.
Yeah, am I unmuted? Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I really enjoyed all of the papers and the new concept and with the terror management concept. I think it's a very exciting concept. Depending on how you actually operationalize that concept, I know that may be some challenge, but I think that's certainly a great start. And And Tony, I was glad to see that you are digging into some of the Latinx and the Black Americans concepts, and I think I see that study really is very exciting, and certainly I would like to keep up with that. I think the findings are going to be very revealing, because we really need to get into fine tune our perceptions, definition of these kind of the concept that you are dealing with. And I think it's your study is very timely. And this is the time, I think, to get into those kinds of study where we try to refine concept of ideology, policy, and try to differentiate between those, because most opinion polls or opinion study do not, the individual, when you're measuring opinions, sometimes it's very difficult to actually ensure that the person that you're interviewing actually truly understand the concept that you're trying to get at. And sometimes you get a really distorted outcome. And I think that what you're doing by differentiating policy, making it, refining it, I think we're going to have come out with a better outcome. I really am excited about those very, very much.
Thank you, Dr. Brown. We
Yeah.
really hope to do it too. Really
Yeah.
hope to finish this project.
Yeah.
Things
Are
have
you
been a
all
little
able-
chaotic the last year. I don't know. All bets are off, but we're going to try.
Are you able to hear me at
Yeah.
all? Are you, okay, so because I can't, this is too good of a conversation. I'm like holding my, I gotta talk. Okay, but Val and Tony, right? So you're saying Latinx community, right? So I'm even looking at some of the gender gap data, and we're still waiting on national exit poll data to disaggregate by gender, right? But it will be very interesting for us to dig even deeper, right? To kind of look at, in particular, where is gendered support for Trump coming from among Latinx voters? Because as you all well know, even more than I do in this literature, that there emerges quite divergence between geographic areas. And when we look at actual ethnic, ethnicity within this context, that you're going to see very different outcomes for various policy supports. What's going to be really interesting in your work around that is that this isn't just a Trump phenomenon. This isn't just Trump, right? That this has something to do, that this is a much broader analysis, which is why a project that is comparable to Dawson's is critically important for helping us to understand those kinds of fundamental differences, right, that exist within the Latinx population, right? And how those differences can be prodded at particular points, mobilized at particular points, and then used to obscure, right, Latinx voting overall, right, to make broader claims that are actually possible based on the ways in which we know internally when we're disaggregating the disaggregated data. Right. But that kind of fine tooth analysis is exactly what we need, because some of the claims, even that you're making in the paper initially, I think you already know this, aren't going to hold when we start to disaggregate between Cuban Americans, Mexican Americans, so those things are going to fall apart. And I think you all already know this. So how are you going to handle that from the onset of the project so that you're not perpetuating the same kinds of challenges and difficulties that we see oftentimes with our colleagues in the press? That makes
Yeah, that's real important. And it's one of the reasons to present work like this in an early stage at a conference like this, because as you know, you get involved in a project, sometimes you miss some things. You begin pursuing a line of reasoning and you forget that there are contrary views as well. And we try to be attentive to that. Val, of course, was a principal investigator for the Latino National Survey, which just sliced and diced, 9,000 Latino respondents in all different ways, and found some really clear patterns, which, as you suggest, in some cases correspond to ethno-national origin. In other cases, they do not. I did probably 12 years ago, did a paper based on the LNS about racial attitudes among Latinx, looking at self-reported skin color and self-reported race. And you get two different things. Latinos who self-identify as dark-skinned look much more like African Americans than the smaller group of Latinx who self-identify as Afro-Latino. So we begin to tap into things like skin color prejudice and internalization of skin color attitudes, which varies across ethnic group as well. Racial attitudes among Cuban Americans are different from racial attitudes among Dominican Americans. So you're absolutely right. I mean, when we finish disaggregating the disaggregation, hopefully we won't end up with a cell of 3 respondents. which happened in the Latino National Political Survey many years ago. But I certainly take your criticism or your caution to heart. We don't want to replicate punditry, false punditry, but we do want to be able to map, and I see this visually. I see overlapping histograms or overlapping mountain charts where we can show that the center of gravity for Latinx respondents is moved perhaps in one direction, the center of gravity for Black respondents moved in another, but there's going to be a lot of overlap. And that overlap is politically significant because that overlap represents areas where politicians, NGOs, activist organizations can appeal to both groups simultaneously and not have to speak Spanish in the morning and speak, Southern drawl English in the evening. If you're appealing to people on the basis of issues about which they care, then you're much more likely to build a coalition than if, as Trump has done so assiduously. And mentioning Trump, I do want to say this. We're just using Trump supporters and Trumpism as a convenient starting point. But we certainly, Wendy, we're not going to build our whole analysis around the Trump years or Trump supporters. But it was convenient because that dramatized for the general public that the Black and Latinx populations are in fact diverse enough to protest at the Capitol, diverse enough to support Trump. Although, Black folks there's always been a certain percentage of the Black population that's voted for conservative, even racist politicians. That goes back to 100 years or more. And Latinx as well, as you point out, the Cuban American population actually is much less conservative now than it was just 25 or 30 years ago, but still significantly more conservative than the broader Latinx population.
So while my internet, I was going to say, while my internet is it working?
Yes.
Okay. I want to say to Mandy, Dustin, and Griffin about your paper.
We're losing you again, Wendy.
The terror management perspective. I think one of the things you've got to, okay, wait, let's see. I think one of the things that I press you to think very critically about is when we're talking about terror, if we're thinking about physical safety, economic safety, or fear around the future, right? Or conceptualizations of what my future possibilities might look like. And I think that is going to be that's in relationship to building a kind of theoretical framework out of around concepts of fear, because there are different dynamics and motivators that exist around those different components of fear. And then gender and class will then elevate as variables that you want to be concerned around based on the dimension of.
We've lost you, or at least I've lost you again, Wendy. I apologize. I do want to point out that we did include, we didn't include it in this paper, but the more everyone's talking, the more I think perhaps we should moving forward. We did include some questions on policing in the criminal justice system, which also could speak to fear relatively well and pull it outside of just the Trumpism sort of argument, right? And I think that might be an excellent way to sort of move this forward. Like Stephen was saying earlier, it's a new theory that we're applying in political science, right? It's over there. I found it in a lot of other places, but nowhere near us, right? And so I think that could be a great sort of place to move forward. And I would particularly be interested in gender differences there as well. But anyway, thank you, Wendy. I appreciate it. And I did see your comments in the chat too.
Fear that you're tapping into. We have time for one additional comment. We have about 5 more minutes. So I do want to make sure we have thoroughly opened it to our audience participants.
I think Emmett was about to say something.
Oh yeah, I was just going to make a comment about perhaps parceling out the role of anti-Blackness right across even minoritized groups, because I think that is a real thing that's happening, and we don't have a whole lot of data on it that looks at it in a consistent way. The CMPS data, which I actually got DePaul to make me a collaborator this year, actually is going to have an oversample of measures of anti-Blackness within those groups, because I think so much, while the Trump years are the boiling point, I think we've been moving towards this point over the last 30, 40, 50 years, closer and closer. And now we see a large number of racial and ethnic minoritized groups in America who are experiencing America inherently different. And so their outlook on the role of government is different. Their outlook on the role of individualism is different. And on the piece with college students, I wonder how clever college students are with masking their responses. I think Trump becomes a polarizing figure. A lot of people not really admitting that they're going to vote for Trump. Definitely, I think conversations about systemic racism is going to impact how we now measure like racial attitudes, because everybody is talking about what systemic racism is and it's salient. So now, if you are openly admitting that you believe Blacks are lazy, that you score higher on the racial resentment scale, you may mask your responses now, because we're talking about race now in a different way than we've defined it as being explicitly racist through overt uses of the N-word. And Cameron Birch has an excellent piece too in JLP about what these racial attitudes mean amongst minoritized groups and how they can be interpreted differently. I do have a question though about, I was in and out and had sort of some crazy stuff going on this morning, but there was a hypothesis about racial and ethnic minorities being more, was it more likely to support Trump? Was that supported or not in the college paper?
Well, there were 3 hypotheses that we tested. One
I
was
think this was the first one I saw on your slide.
okay, that was identifying as evangelical.
Okay.
So, and we used a biblical literalism scale from Book of Fables, the standard one, from Book of Fables to.
Was that supported?
In the non-white portion of the
Okay.
sample, not among whites.
What theoretical justification would be for evangelical Christians who are racialized to move in that direction? One of the things I'm thinking about is Black voters are highly, and when I think about race, within the context of Black voters in particular, they're highly conservative on social issues, but that conservatism never translates into political behavior. So you may have an individual who's anti-gay marriage, but will support a progressive candidate. And I do think parceling out those differences may help improve that aspect of it, because there's just so much complexity when you get to thinking about the way in which religion plays a role in racial and ethnic minorities' political behavior. I'm a Southern Baptist, so I'm highly, on issues, but then that never moves me in the direction of supporting candidates who are ultra progressive.
Emmett, if I could jump in here with, I think we have a minute and a half left to respond to your very appropriate point about anti-Black attitudes, anti-Black racism among Latinos. That actually was my starting point, was that some significant Latino support for Trump may well have been motivated by his anti-Black rhetoric. And conversely, some Black support for Trump may have been motivated by his anti-immigrant rhetoric and anti-Latino rhetoric. Interestingly, nobody talks about that. I mean, if you look at all the newspaper articles and all the opinion pieces, nobody talks about anti-Black racism as an element of Latino political consciousness, although Latinos know that it's real. So that is definitely something that we'll pursue, but it didn't make it into this first cut of the paper because we didn't have much to base it on in terms of other writers' opinion pieces and so on. But thank you for that. You're exactly right. But it works the other way around too. The other way, right. It's also anti-immigrant and anti-Latino prejudice among some part of the African American population. People may be willing to set aside everything else they know about Trump if he's going to be against Black people, or they're going to set aside everything else they don't like about Trump if he's going to stop immigration.
I hate to
interrupt,
this is the
best spirit of NCOPES. We're out of time.
Thank you.
I think our advanced net person is also, this is one of those moments at NCOPES where we say, take it to the lobby. Hopefully we will be back in our usual form this time next year, and we will be able to take these conversations to the lobby. Thank you all for these amazing papers, and I hope to see more of this work in the near future coming forward. So
Wendy,
keep moving.
before we leave, I put up a copy of our paper in the chat box, so grab it there. If you don't see it, or if the chat box disappears, let me know and I'll email it to you. Thank you. Thank you
Thanks,
so much, Wendy.
Thank you all. Have a good one.
You too.
Thank you.
Apologies again on my technical.
These things happen.
I know, right?
We're glad you were here.
I had the same
Thank you.
problem last week when I was chat moderating at the Pi Sigma Alpha conference. So I'm completely on your.
And the funny thing is, I was like, everything was working fine until 5 minutes into the panel. So let me call
Tony,
cable again.
The whole
Tony, could you
numbers
mail,
What's
Tony,
that,
could you
Joseph?
mail me a copy?
Yeah,
Email
can you-
me a copy.
Yeah, your email address,
It's
where can I find it?
Joseph _ Brown, BROWN at Baylor.edu.
Okay, I'll do that. Thank you.
All right, appreciate
So long,
it.
everybody.
All right, bye-bye.
Good work, Tony. Good
Thank
work,
you, Wendy.
Mandy.
Take care, everyone. Stay safe.
You too.
All right,
Thank you.
bye-bye.
Thank you
Get
all.
your
We
shots.
appreciate it.